What have the Houthis achieved after 1 year of Red Sea attacks? Through disrupting global trade, they've proven their solidarity with Palestine, but Israel's war on Gaza continues nonetheless. Dozens of attacks on vessels have left supply chains more vulnerable than ever. But who is paying the highest price? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. On both the economic and geopolitical fronts, Houthi attacks on Red Sea shipping have caused deep and disturbing damage. Appropriately named the Gate of Grief, the Bab al-Mandeb is a key global shipping strait en route to the Suez Canal. And over the last year, Houthi actions have cut commercial traffic through the strait by more than 2/3. Their siege has pushed the Israeli Red Sea port of Eilat into bankruptcy, and Egypt has watched its Suez Canal revenue drop by more than half. All the while, the people of Yemen continue to suffer desperately while the country's civil war persists. Here's a look now at the Houthi siege of the Red Sea.
This recent attack marked the end of a month-long lull in Houthi strikes in the Red Sea. The Cordelia Moon oil tanker was hit by a remote-controlled surface vessel. The Houthis mistakenly described the tanker as a British oil ship, but in reality, it's a Panama-flagged tanker engaged in Russian oil trades with India. The attack is one of many by the Iran-backed group as part of their campaign to show solidarity with Palestine amid the ongoing Israeli onslaught.
The Houthi armed forces are continuing to carry out their military operations and impose a naval blockade on the Israeli enemy. These operations will not stop except with the cessation of aggression against Gaza, lifting the siege on it and stopping the aggression against Lebanon.
The Red Sea route previously handled $1 trillion worth of cargo annually, but last month the IMF estimated that had fallen by 2/3. Adding to global inflation and having a disproportionate effect on Egypt's economy. So far, the Houthis have targeted over 80 merchant ships, capturing 1, sinking 2, and killing at least 4 sailors. The attacks have prompted a US-led international naval presence to escort tankers in the Red Sea, as well as rounds of American and British airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen. A separate EU naval mission was also formed in February.
Although the Houthis have claimed that they're conducting these attacks in support of the Palestinian people, their actions prove to the contrary. In fact, these are simply reckless acts of terrorism which continue to destabilize global and regional commerce, put the lives of innocent civilian mariners at risk, and imperil the vibrant maritime ecosystem in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, the Houthis' own backyard.
The Houthis justify their attacks by arguing that the US and European countries should be held accountable for supplying Israel with weapons and not taking proper action to stop Israel's onslaught on Palestine and Lebanon. And there are fears in Western intelligence agencies that these attacks could become far more sophisticated. Citing 2 regional officials, the Reuters news agency reported recently that Russian representatives and the Houthis have held at least 2 meetings in Iran's capital, Tehran. The US Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, described the meetings as alarming amid suggestions that the Houthis could be trying to buy supersonic Yakont cruise missiles. The economic ramifications of this conflict extend far beyond the immediate region, as the Houthis' success isn't measured by the number of direct hits, but by how they raise costs for global shipping. The Red Sea serves as a crucial artery for global trade, linking Africa and Asia with roughly 10 to 15% of the world's cargo passing through the Suez Canal. Recent disruptions have forced shipping companies to reroute their vessels around the Cape of Good Hope, adding significant time and cost to their operations, estimated at around $1 million per tanker. The escalating geopolitical tensions in the Red Sea are casting doubt on the crucial route's viability going forward. And as the blockade persists and the Israeli attacks on Gaza show no signs of ending, the fight for control of the region shows no sign of ending.
So 1 year after the Houthis began their attacks on Red Sea shipping, what have they achieved and who's really paying the price? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are from Sana'a, Yemeni journalist Yousef Al-Mawri, from Allendale, Michigan, professor of Middle East Studies and Political Science at Grand Valley State University, Gamal Gasim, and Ibrahim Jalal is a Yemeni security, conflict, and defense researcher and co-founding member of the Security Distillery think tank. Thanks all so much for being with me. Ibrahim, I'll start with you because we last discussed this when the crisis first kicked off. So, how would you now sum up the last year and how Houthi actions have affected global dynamics as well as the people in Yemen?
1 year on, it's been evident that countries, let's say littoral states specifically, but also, the global trade have been a victim of Houthi attacks over the past 1 year. We've had increased cost of shipping, more decrease in use of Red Sea by at least 50% on a year-to-year basis. And, the passage through Suez Canal has been negatively affected, thus also affecting the timeline in which consumers across the world receive goods, be it anything literally, from, daily goods into industrial, heavy materials, supply chains. So this has not boded well for these countries, but also countries who have been impacted by conflict, such as Yemen, Sudan, or countries that rely on imports significantly, like Djibouti and Somalia. And these have, of course, exacerbated multidimensional poverty, humanitarian needs, but also the quest to have a redirection in that course.
Let me ask Yousef then, if you think through this past year, the Houthis have achieved what they wanted?
Well, I think so. Even though not to the end goal, I think they've achieved part of their goal or part of their plan, which is to put pressure on the Israeli economy in order to force this genocide to come to an end. That's the whole purpose of these military attacks in the Red Sea, in the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, surrounding waters. These operations since day one, since November 19, when the first Israeli-linked ship was captured and seized, the Ansar Allah Houthis, they declared that the genocide first and foremost needs to end. So, every nation has the right to trade and has the right to cross the Red Sea and has the right to use Bab al-Mandab and ship to any nation that they want. However, the Palestinians, they also have the right to live. And because they are undergoing genocide, unfortunately, some nations are going to lose those rights because some of these countries are enabling the genocide to happen. They're allowing and enabling the genocide to continue. So I think from a humanitarian perspective, our focus should be on ways of preventing and bringing an end to the massacre of over 45,000 innocent Palestinians, as opposed to just focusing our main priority on.
Okay, Yousef, it seems we have problems with your connection, but we have you back now. So let me ask you a question about what actually is or who is getting through to the Red Sea now. What kind of vessels are the Houthis really hitting? Because if we look at the last major attack on the Cordelia Moon, it was first said to be a British tanker. That was later retracted. So whose was it? Where was it going? And does it indicate anything about the potentially illicit traffic that's still getting through the Bab al-Mandab Strait?
Well, that's a good question. The best way I can put it is the Ansar Allah Houthis, they have a ban list. The ban list consists of ships, vessels, oil tanker companies, and all affiliates that are placed on this list, and basically they are prevented from crossing Bab al-Mandab and prevented from crossing the Red Sea. And basically because the military escalations from Yemen have increased and have escalated, the Ansar Allah Houthis are threatening to target these ships in any of their journeys as long as they are continuing their affiliation with the Israeli regime. So any country and any company, it doesn't have to be a ship that is sailing to Israel. It doesn't have to be oil, cement, and vital materials being shipped from China to Israel that's going to be targeted. But any ship, even if it was a ship that was sailing from Russia to China, if that vessel company from Russia to China, if they have shipped to Israel over the past 8 months, if they are affiliated to Israel in any way, shape, or form, that ship is going to be targeted on its journey from Russia to China. And this is
And the
something
Houthis
that
have the
international
intelligence to
community
know
doesn't
this.
seem to understand, because they do. And to everybody's surprise, they have the intelligence to know which ships are shipping to Israel, which, they have access to sophisticated databases from, insurance companies, but basically a set of databases, analysis reports that basically establish a well-connected network with most of these shipping vessel companies with Israel. And it doesn't, there's some ships are registered under the Panama flag. And as it turned out, according to the Ansarullah Houthis, a lot of these ships that are getting licensed from Panama are linked to Israel, but they're trying to go undetected by registering under Panama. And this is the problem that the international community is having, is understanding why a certain ship was targeted, since it was not shipping to Israel. As it turned out, according to the Ansarullah Houthis, it was linked to Israel, and it will be targeted if it continues to be affiliated and linked to the Israeli regime.
Okay, it's extremely interesting. Gamal, let me come to you, because according to Yousef, they have the intelligence, it's accurate, they have the weaponry, it's also been accurate in its targets. So have the Houthis actually been able to prove that the US and the UK and Israel and its allies can't stop this?
I think to a large degree, yes. The answer is yes. The Houthis actually benefited domestically and internationally from people always underestimating their capabilities, whether it is their military capabilities, their political capabilities, their ability to understand the geopolitics of the region. And actually, to give the Houthis credit for their attacks on using the Red Sea and using Bab el-Mandeb Strait, strategic importance, the Houthis is the only, maybe not just a Yemeni government, but an Arab government in the Red Sea, aside from Egypt, that has used the Red Sea road effectively to put pressure into the international community, as well as Israel, to end its war escalation in Gaza. So to that, yes, the Houthis benefited from all people who have been underestimating their military capabilities, their political capabilities in achieving that. And to some extent, they have been very, very successful. They draw the attention of international community, and as a result of their attacks, we have seen that the United States with Britain, they established this coalition called the Coalition of Prosperity. At that time, they wanted Israel to be out of this confrontation against the Houthis, not because the United States at that time was hoping not to expand the conflict in Gaza to be to include other actors in the region. Okay. So they established this coalition, and they start targeting Yemeni targets in Hodeidah and others, and in Sana'a. But actually, that did not help deter the Houthis from continuing their attacks, because I think the Houthis are very clear in their political objective here, and I think the international community should take them very seriously. This is not a group that you think of like, not that sophisticated. No, they are very, very sophisticated. They prove that their political skills in controlling North Yemen, in fighting for 8 years, and also in sending a clear message. They will not stop their attacks in the Red Sea unless the Israeli aggression and the genocide in Gaza is stopped. I think they are very clear, and I don't think that they're going to stop.
Let me ask Ibrahim, though, because both of our other panelists have now cited the sophistication of the Houthis here. So to what degree have there been workarounds of the siege of the Red Sea, I'll call it that? How much is now going through land routes, potentially, to Israel? Because we have seen some reports that Jordan has actually denied, but they did actually jail one reporter who investigated and allegedly found trade routes supplying Israel via Jordan. And there's also the question of weapons trade that is still getting through, and that it's a way that Iran and Russia can still benefit from the Houthi siege.
I think there's much more in terms of alternative routes. I mean, Israel has historically relied on its Mediterranean imports rather than the one in Eilat, and therefore the level of disruption has not been necessarily very badly felt compared to countries that have massive ports in there, let's say, and the ground routes need further verification indeed. Countries like Egypt have lost at least 60% of revenue from Suez Canal, and these have continued to put further economic pressures. So the question is, how many countries have been affected in the region vis-a-vis Israel? And the question is, was Eilat, port really the main port for Israel through which it imports much of its goods that are coming from overseas? And that the reality is actually different. Is that many regional states, including Yemen, have been affected. And I think I've never seen someone celebrate to be hit by Israeli strike, but some Houthi officials, not even the Palestinian people, celebrate Houthi, Israeli strikes on them. And that speaks about a massive disregard of the civilian infrastructure in Yemen, the amount of humanitarian suffering that the people have undergone, and lack of governance shortcomings rather than any political skill, quite honestly. People have hoped that they would not be subject to more airstrikes, that they would not hope to be subject to more conflict expansion, that they would have the basic sort of restoration of economic needs, payment of salaries, steady flow of humanitarian goods, reopening of airports. But what's happening now is they're defining, some actors in Yemen as a global threat to trade and security. That does not help the people of Yemen moving forward in the long term.
Okay.
So there's more fear that this would have long-term blowbacks in the country itself rather than in Israel.
Okay. Yeah, Yousef, we actually spoke about this last time, and the accusation against the Houthis that they are engaging in this war and they're using the cause of defending Palestine and the Palestinians to distract from the fact that they have not been able to help their own people, and that actually their own are spiraling further and further into humanitarian crises while they engage in warfare instead of administering the regions that they now control. How does that fare with you a year after these attacks have started?
Well, let's keep in mind, the Ansarullah Houthi movement it's an Islamic movement. They claim the banners of Islam. They claim to be following the Quran. So according to the Quran, the people of Yemen is not just limited to the Yemeni borders. Ansarullah Houthis, they view the Palestinians, they view the Lebanese, they view the majority, the vast Muslim world as also being people of Yemen, because this is what Islam instructs, that the Muslim nation is one nation, and a war of one Muslim group is the war of the entirety of the Muslim world. So essentially, Palestinians, Yemen is engaging in war with the Palestinians because they feel that this is an attack against Yemen, this is an attack against the entirety of the Muslim world. Likewise with Lebanon. This is not a secular movement. So because the Palestinians are Muslim and because Lebanese are Muslim, Yemen feels the obligation that they must do everything that they can to alleviate their suffering and to end the genocide as if it was happening on Yemeni ground. And yes, I do agree with some of your guests, your two guests actually. I agree with them that this is, Yemen is taking a very decisive stance. And even though that's going to have repercussions on Yemen, we've seen Israel attack Yemen a couple of times. Of course, they've only attacked civilian and local infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, such as oil and diesel storage tanks, power plants. But they haven't really been able to weaken or disable the Ansarullah Houthi movement's ability to continue launching attacks. In fact, Ansarullah have only continued to increase their attacks, and now they're even launching hypersonic missiles on Israeli-linked ships and on the heart of the Israeli capital, Tel Aviv. And they're only going to continue to increase these attacks as long as the bloodshed continues in Palestine and now as we see in Lebanon.
Let me get some final thoughts then from Gamal, based on what you just heard there, and especially the angle of whether all Yemenis are truly supportive of what the Houthis are doing in this respect. And, have the U.S. and U.K. retaliation, for example, has it made any difference, or has it further fanned, the flames of this conflict?
I think the Palestinian issue, whether for Islamic movements or for secular movements or nationalist movements in the Arab region, is a consensus issue. All people agree that the suffering of the Palestinians should end, that the Palestinians have the right to establish their own state, that this genocide in Gaza should stop. So while all Yemenis are behind these actions and may be happy that at least the Houthis are doing something here to basically draw the attention of the international community to the conflict in Gaza, but at the same time they really hope that the Houthis will also end the suffering inside Yemen. I agree with Mr. Jalal that Yemenis are suffering for a long time, for almost a decade now, and the suffering is actually continues under the Houthis control areas, the areas that it is under their control.
Okay.
More than 400,000 people being killed actually, whether directly or indirectly as a result of the war. And what the Yemenis feel is they basically could be actually illustrated in the Arabic saying that وَظُلْمِ ذُو الْقُرْبَى أَشَدُّ مَضَاضَةً مِنْ وَقِعِ الْحُسَامِ الْمُهَنَّدِ, meaning the oppression of one's relatives has more impact than the effect of a sword.
Okay.
So Yemenis would also hope that the Houthis will also work to end the suffering of the Yemenis at home by continuing the peace negotiations with the Yemeni government, trying to end the conflict in Yemen, because really it really has huge toll on the people's lives.
Gamal, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there and give you the final word. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists really so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Well, as mentioned, one thing the Houthis have achieved is a destabilization of international shipping. And joining me now to talk about the repercussions for global trade is from London, Secretary General and Director of the Global Shippers Forum, James Hookum. Thanks so much for being with me. I just want to go back first to something you said in the summer when you were asked about the consequences of Houthi actions. You said, actually, and I'm quoting, "The ripple effect has been huge. Singapore, of all ports, becoming hyper-congested and brought to a standstill. That was never in the script, and shippers had been surprised by just how deep the repercussions are." Explain that ripple effect and the unexpected depth you were talking about there, and is it still the case right now?
Well, yes, it most certainly is. And the ripple effect that I was describing has played out across the world shipping lanes, mainly because the way that container shipping services are organized by the 9 or so global container shipping operators. I think the best way of thinking about this is it's more like a bus service or a train service, that there may be disruption on one particular part of the route, but the way that buses and trains and container ships are shared around the entire network means the knock-on effects from one perhaps localized incident or disruption, such as the Red Sea, affects the way that container ships, buses and trains are deployed around the rest of the network. And we're seeing exactly that in the container shipping industry at the moment. Although the primary impact has been on Far East to Europe and the East Coast of North America services, vessels have been added to that service to make up for the extra distances involved because of diverting around the Red Sea. And that's taken ships away or affected the availability of ships on other services. And therefore, shippers are experiencing congestion and delays in other parts of the network.
Right. So when it first kicked off then, did you think first it would go on this long and that it would actually be this bad? And then who do you think has really been hit the worst?
Well, I think we were in dismay at the extent to which what seemed to be, with all respect, a relatively localized impact and hopefully a very short-term, very short-lived impact, had the major repercussions that it did. And although the attack started at around about this time last year, as you are describing, it wasn't until really mid-December that they came of a scale where the container shipping lines decided to make the diversions and operate around the Cape of Good Hope. And that took a lot of us by surprise, because I guess we hadn't realized just how bad it had got. And let me say straight away, we fully understand the reasoning of the shipping lines, because, of course, what they were not doing was putting their crew and indeed their vessels in harm's way, and that was understandable.
And I mean, how much worse can it actually get if this continues like this?
Well, in a perhaps a very simplistic way, we think that the actual repercussions of the Red Sea diversions have largely settled down, and that obviously new schedules have been implemented, new vessels have been put into the services from the Far East and Southeast Asia to Europe and the US, and by and large those services have stabilised.
James Hookum, unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank you really so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. And thanks, of course, to our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.